he's going to be succeeded by 10 gurus. We're going to look at some of them in some detail, minor detail, but not enormous detail. But when you look at these PowerPoints, you have this information here. And so the first set of dates here is the lifespan of the person, and then the lifespan of their period when they were a guru. Nanak, of course, is retrospectively the first guru. So then the second one is Angad, and you will notice that Nanak dies in 1539. So Angad is the guru from 1539 to 52. And similarly with all the remaining 8 until we get to the last guru. We'll find out why there are no gurus after Guru Gobind Singh. He is the last guru of the Sikhs. All right. So there is a holy book, but I think this slide should have been there before. So the principle of succession is that initially it is not hereditary, as I've indicated, but it becomes hereditary eventually. The 4th guru is the son-in-law of the 3rd, and Guru Arjan Das, also known as Arjan Dev. Sometimes it's spelled as Arjun, but Arjan is Arjan Das or Arjan Dev. Guru Arjan Das is the 3rd son of Guru Ram Das, who was the 4th guru. Okay. So in other words, what's going to happen henceforth is that the principle of succession would be hereditary, but it is not based on primogeniture. Primogeniture is the eldest son is going to become the guru. That's not the case. So that's why he gave the case of Arjan Das, who is the 3rd son of Guru Ram Das. Okay. The 5th guru, Arjan Dev, here is the one who is going to start to compile what is called the Adi Granth. Adi is a word we have encountered many times before, as in Adi Shankaracharya, right? The first Shankaracharya. So Adi means first, and Granth here is the holy book. It is the holy book as established by Arjan Dev. The book as a whole is called the Guru Granth Saheb. Adi Granth refers to simply that part of the Guru Granth Saheb which had been established by, the holy book as it had been established by Arjan Dev, but verses kept on being added to it. So the Guru Granth Sahib is the final end result that we have, right? So for example, Guru Gobind Singh, the last guru, adds verses by his father, Tegh Bahadur, and then this final compilation is the Guru Granth Sahib. All right. Now, 2 or 3 minor, well, not minor things, but things we can talk about very briefly, and then we look at some of the other gurus. So why is the Granth Sahib called the Guru Granth Sahib very often? Because Guru Gobind Singh, the 10th guru, stipulated that there would be no more gurus after him, no living gurus after him. And the Guru and the Granth Sahib, that is the holy book of the gurus, would take the place of a guru, a teacher. Which is to say that if a Sikh is looking for guidance today, he doesn't turn to a guru, a living guru, he turns to the Granth Sahib, because the Granth Sahib for an observant Sikh is always a living text. It takes the place of a guru. Whatever guidance you need, you can get from there. And as I've mentioned before, the size of the book has been fixed at 1430 pages in Gurmukhi. What is the nature of the work? This is not a complete list that you're seeing here. The complete list would include 15, 20 other people. Okay, so you're talking about something about 5,800 something compositions or hymns that you find in the Guru Granth Sahib, 974 authored by Guru Nanak. The largest contributor is Guru Arjan Dev, the 5th guru, who contributed 20 to 18 hymns. But notice very carefully that the Guru Granth Sahib includes not just the hymns of the gurus, it includes Kabir, Sheikh Farid, a Sufi saint born in 1173, 30 shlokas from him, 292 hymns from Kabir, and another 15, 20 figures, some of whom were Hindu saints, some of whom were Muslims. All of this is now part of the Guru Granth Saheb. All right. So, if we had to characterize the major contributions of the other Sikh gurus, and as I've already reiterated, it is not necessary to go over all of them because then we would be doing an exhaustive book-length study, obviously. But each of these gurus contributed something. So if you look here at this brief history over here, and I will expound on some of these matters over here. So 1539, you have the death of Guru Nanak. Then you have Lena, who has now been christened Guru Angad. What is his contribution? He collects Nanak's hymns. He is going to standardize the script and he is going to establish these manjis. Manjis are these places of worship. The Gurdwara, as we know it, the Muslims, as you know, worship at a masjid. The Hindus worship at a temple. The Gurdwara, the Christians worship at a church, right? Where do the Sikhs worship? The Sikhs worship at, initially, it was a manji, which was a place of worship, but it had not been formalized into what is now called the Gurdwara. All right. The fourth Guru, Ram Das, is going to found the city of Amritsar. Now that is very important, and we want to look at that in connection with what the fifth Guru, whose name has come up on a number of occasions because he contributed the largest number of hymns to the Guru Granth Saheb, right? Arjan Das or Arjan Dev is going to complete Amritsar. He's also going to build another major Gurdwara called Taran Taran. The Guru Granth Sahib, which we've seen, begins to take shape. First as the Adi Granth, the original, the first Granth. All right. And then we're going to see, we're going to have to pause here for a second before we get to this aspect of it, because this will introduce, this will require introducing the Mughals into the story. And we will obviously be looking at them in much greater detail later on. But we're going to find that from the time of Guru Arjan Dev, at the least, possibly a little bit earlier, the Sikhs are going to have a turbulent history in relationship to the Mughal Empire, very turbulent history in relationship to the Mughal Empire. And Guru Arjan Dev is going to be the first of the 10 gurus who is going to be martyred. Okay. Now, when I use the word martyred, I want to make an intervention. So 2 interventions are required at this point. One is over the history of Amritsar. The second is over the idea of being martyred. Okay. Very briefly, just so that you understand the context over here, Jahangir, who is now the Mughal emperor, he is going to accuse, okay, Guru Arjan Dev of supporting Khusro, who is Jahangir's son and a pretender to the throne. That is, that he is trying to usurp the throne from his father. Right? He's trying to usurp it. And Jahangir is going to say that to Guru Arjan Dev, you are supporting my son in his rebellion against me. And so he is going to have him executed. So this is the first of the Sikh gurus who is going to be martyred. Now, when I say martyred, it's very important because this idea of martyrdom really comes into India through the Sikhs. Among the Hindus, among the Jains, among the Buddhists, you don't really have this idea of being martyred. The word that we use in Hindi commonly today is what? When you say a person has martyred himself or herself, the person has become a martyr. You say, wo shaheed ho gaya, shaheed. And martyrdom is shaheedat. So when the government of India talks about the shaheedat of Mahatma Gandhi, who was murdered this month on January 30th, right? Assassinated on January 30th. And they say his shahadat, they're actually using an idea which is not really present among the Hindus or Jains at all. There's no concept of this. This really is a concept that you find in Islam, except that we don't really know that the Muslims were extensively speaking about the idea of shahidat. One of the reasons they weren't is because the Muslims became the dominant empire. So it's really the minority, right? I mean, see, here the Sikhs are now a small minority, a minuscule minority, and they are being persecuted by the Mughal emperors. And so it is really, even though the idea of the shahidat is available in Islam, my suggestion very simply is this, that it is really actually with the Sikhs that this idea comes into place. And it becomes a major feature, by the way, of modern Indian thinking and civilization. There are hundreds of films, which explore the whole idea of shahidat. Bhagat Singh, one of the great heroes of the 20th century, dies in his, when he's 30 years old or something. Uh, People talk about the shahidat of Bhagat Singh. Okay. And as I said, even the shahidat of Mohandas Gandhi, although this idea is not really, as I said, a Hindu idea. Now, the other thing here is this whole idea of Amritsar that we need to think about. And I need to show you before we get to this slide here, we want to see this, a couple of images here. You've doubtless seen them, but now you're seeing them in connection with this lecture on Sikhism. So this is the Golden Temple complex. These buildings that you see in white there against the back, these are part of that whole complex, but these would be, many of them would be buildings that would be administrative buildings, and buildings. Some of them would have rooms for pilgrims to stay in and all of that. What you want to pay your attention to is obviously what is called the Golden Temple. It's called the Golden Temple because in 1839, this is not originally how it was. It was really in 1839 that Emperor Ranjit Singh, the emperor of the Sikhs, when they were still a Sikh kingdom before it became annihilated a few years later by the British, he actually put this kind of gold leaf over the entire structure. And it's from that time that it started becoming known as the Golden Temple. Before, it would have been more of what you might call a brick and mortar structure. It's set in a pool. Okay, I want you to think about that. And it is slightly sunk, slightly. Okay. So it's at a slightly lower level. All right. Here's a different view of that. You can see this is the causeway, right? So where the cursor is moving. So you walk from here and you walk here, and you notice there's an opening here. There's an entrance. There's an entrance here, and you can't see it obviously from this picture, but there is an entrance on each of the four sides. So there are four entrances into the major temple, right? The Gurdwara here. Okay, and what is kept inside the Gurdwara? It is not an idol, because the Sikhs don't believe in idols. It is what? You can guess. A copy of the Guru Granth Saheb, right? A copy of the Guru Granth Sahib, which every morning in a ritual is brought in here, and then at 10 p.m. it's taken out and it's put back in a different building, where it's covered in cloth and kept reverentially. And then at the break of dawn the next day, it is brought back into this, and the whole ritual is repeated every night. And when it is brought in over here, then the verses are sung. They are sung nonstop for the entire day. Okay, right? So what I did not tell you over here is that, I gave you the number of hymns, but each of these compositions is set to a raga. Okay, it's set to a raga. So partly because these are compositions that are meant to be sung. You can obviously read it just like you can read poetry, but just as poetry is meant to be read aloud, literally, actually, initially, so these compositions really are meant to be sung. And there is obviously great skill required in it, and there are people who are experts in doing so. Now, Amritsar, um, so Amrit Saras, Amrit means nectar. Sar here means pool, so it's literally a pool of nectar, like a pool of honey. Okay, it would become in Guru Arjan Dev's time, the fifth Guru's time, the preeminent city of the Sikhs, a place of pilgrimage, the heart of the faith. Um, that complex, the Har Mandir, which is literally the house of God, because Amritsar is the city, remember. Okay, it's a city. And then you have within that what is now called the Golden Temple complex. Golden Temple known by that name after the time of Ranjit Singh in 1839. But the temple, the Gurdwara, was established earlier during the time of Guru Arjan Dev. All right, so we're talking about, if you go back over here, you can see over here, Arjan Dev 1563 to 1606, and he's a guru from 1581 to 1606. So let's just take a round figure, 1600, roughly around 1600 is when this Harmandir, and this is the Harmandir over here, okay, the seat of God. This is going to become the soul of this complex, which is also known as the Darbar Sahib. It was a Muslim divine, a Muslim Sufi saint from Lahore who actually laid the foundation stone. This is going to be destroyed a number of times because of the fact that Punjab was a seat of warfare. And now, of course, you have the Mughals as well. It's going to be destroyed, but this is where the foundation stone, what you see now is exactly where the foundation stone had been laid. And the present building probably goes back, I would say, to about the early 1700s. Now, it's very interesting, the architecture. We're going to just spend a couple of minutes, just a couple of minutes, that's all. When you go into a Hindu temple, what you find is that there is one entrance. I'm not talking about the whole complex, because if you remember the huge temple complexes, you have these in South India, for example, you have these gopurams, these gates, and they can lead into the complex. I'm talking about the sanctum sanctorum, the inner heart, right? The place where in a Hindu temple the idol would be located. That temple, there is only one entrance. This Golden Temple, the Har Mandir, has four entrances. What is the significance? The significance is that these four entrances represent the four castes. The idea was, it was a way of saying Sikhism does not believe in caste at all. This is what the institution of Langar sought to do, destroy the institution of caste, show its distance from it. Okay, show its distance from it. The idea of having the four doors were representing the four castes was, in principle, we are open to everyone, right? That is really what it's, how you have to read this. The other thing is that, notice, it's very interesting. And you wouldn't observe it ordinarily unless you really think about it. But when you see a church, and I'm not talking about an ordinary church down the street, I'm talking about the great churches, right? St. Peter's, and at the Vatican, the great cathedrals in Europe, right? They are soaring spires. And even many of the mosques, the minarets are soaring into the sky, right? Reaching out to God, as it were. In Sikhism, the Gurdwara does exactly the opposite. No soaring spires over here. Look at this structure here, right? Yes, it's got the gold leaf and all of that. It's also sunk a little bit into, as I said, a little bit into the ground, okay? So, and in order to that you understand it, consider, for example, that in 1455, the Christian Pope, Nicholas V, said, a faith sustained only by doctrine will never be anything but feeble and vacillating. If the authority of the Holy See, that is the Vatican, were visibly displayed in majestic buildings, all the world would accept and revere it. Right? Where he's saying that, hey, it's very important to have these churches which tower into the sky with their soaring spires. Because, yes, Christian doctrines are great and all of that, but hey, what really impresses is when you see this magnificent soaring architecture. What the Gurdwara is doing is actually really the very opposite, right? It's saying that, yeah, that is misleading. The real faith is the faith within you, as it were. And the idea is to introduce a kind of humility, not a kind of pride. Right? That is what the Gurdwara architecture, as a general rule, will seek to do. Okay. Now, the fact that, by the way, that even though Nanak is describing himself as someone who's neither a Muslim nor a Hindu, the Sikhs are saying we're neither of the two, we're on a different trajectory, as it were. The fact that Hinduism was never far from everything is indicated by, if you really have to look at the structure, because here you see, if this around here, this whole thing here and here, and you're seeing it only one side, you'd have to then, if you had a aerial view and you could see the whole complex, see what is it typically that you do in a temple? You do a parikrama. A parikrama is you circumambulate. Circumambulate, you walk all around. That is exactly what you do over here. You can walk all around, you can do a parikrama. And very often that parikrama is done around a sacred pool of water. One of the best examples of that in India is Pushkar, okay, a sacred lake in Rajasthan, one of the most holy sites for Hindus in the country. And you can do a whole parikrama around the lake. You circumambulate it. This is simply my way of saying that that even as Sikhism was effecting a departure, it was still from Hinduism. It was still partaking of many of the traditions associated with Hinduism as well. All right. Now, if you ever go to the Golden Temple complex, or you go, by the way, to any, fairly big Gurdwara, very often around the Gurdwara, you'll see people setting posters. And what I'm showing you here is a few slides of that, partly because to suggest to you that, look, in some ways, of course, Islam would say that, hey, the Sikhs claim that they're anti-idolatrous. They have no image inside the Gurdwara. There's only the Guru Granth Saheb. They don't worship idols, but they worship their gurus. That's what an Orthodox Muslim would say, right? And certainly you can see, and I'm not saying I necessarily agree or disagree with that view. I'm just saying that this is how an Orthodox Muslim might view it. They might say, no, this is not sufficiently anti-idolatrous, because if you're worshiping the Guru, then the Guru himself has become an idol. But you certainly see this is a popular poster sold outside the Golden Temple showing the 10 Gurus of the faith. And you can here see the Guru Granth Saheb, and here you see the Golden Temple. So it's kind of giving you all the essential elements of the faith, as it were, in one single image. And posters of this kind showing the 10 gurus are exceedingly common. In this one, you see the two gurus who are viewed as having the most important part in the faith. We haven't gotten around. We've talked about Nanak and we've talked about Guru Arjan Dev, the fifth guru. We haven't talked about Guru Gobind Singh. I'm going to get to him. So here you have Nanak and you have Gobind Singh, and then you have the remaining 8 gurus, the 10 gurus of the faith. Sometimes the posters will put Nanak and Gobind Singh, give them a larger portrait to signify that they are in some ways more important. Nanak because he established, he's the founder of the faith, and Nanak is the one who put it. Gobind Singh is the one who put it on a very secure solid footing, right? Who consolidated the faith, as we'll see shortly thereafter. All right. And here is yet another marketplace poster, very common. Here, Nanak is given singularity because he is the founder of the faith. Very common in religious art. We've seen it many times before. There's a halo right here, right? You see that around Christian saints, for example, and holy figures in Christianity, the halo. So, and here's a halo around Nanak. So Nanak in the middle, and then you have the remaining 9 gurus, the 10 gurus of the faith. All right. Now,
you mentioned some of these symbols like a turban were only developed later.
yes, I will get to that. Okay.
Okay.
So I want to get to the last phase of my discussion of Sikhism now, and then ask me whatever questions you have. Okay, because I'll terminate my discussion there, because we're not going to look at the history of Sikhism in the 19th century, 20th century, because that's a huge chapter. You with this you really know the foundations of how Sikhism started, who are the 10 gurus, what are some of the major considerations involved in interpreting Sikhism, what is the nature of the faith, what was the nature of the Guru Granth Saheb, all of that. All right. Now, last important segment here is, let me just get a sip of water, is the following. So we haven't discussed yet, and we will have to do that later because that's a long connected history of its own, and that is a history of the Mughal Empire. Now, I've talked about it in passing, and in particular, I talked about the martyrdom of Guru Arjan Dev at the hands of Jahangir, the Mughal emperor. The ninth Guru, Tegh Bahadur, is also going to be brought before the Mughal emperor, a different Mughal emperor at this time. Now it's the Mughal emperor Aurangzeb. Okay, so Guru Tegh Bahadur, he's a guru from 1664 to 1675, and he is also going to be asked to convert, and he refuses to do so, and so he's going to be martyred. He's going to be executed. His son is going to take over. So if you look at the dates here, this is important. Gobind Singh was only a young boy, a mere 9-10 years old when he became the guru, which meant, of course, that he was being advised and guided for some years to come, for a few years to come at least, he was by the elders, by relatives, by respected people in the community, all of that, right? Until he becomes equipped to take charge on his own. Now, and here I'm really getting to the gist of the matter so that we can move on then to the next segment. But I want to be able to tell you what you really need to know, just sufficient. Okay. The gist of the matter is that there is a feeling among the Sikhs, right? At this point in time, when Gobind Singh becomes a guru, we are talking now about roughly 125, 130, 135 years that have passed since Nanak's death, or since the time that the faith became established. And in the meantime, after Nanak, there have been 8 other gurus. Guru Arjan Dev has established Amritsar as a major site. The Sikhs have their holy book. So the foundations of the faith are in place. But there's one fundamental problem. The fundamental problem, and we can segment this into 2 parts, is that at this point, the Sikhs are still a minuscule group of people. They're relatively very small in numbers. And who is a Sikh? Who, that is, people who have converted, which would have meant people who generally were Hindus and very often lower caste Hindus who would have converted. It's the same reason that lower caste Hindus might convert into Islam. Now, Sikhism is like Islam, but you notice that the 10 gurus, you notice what I mentioned, right? That the Orthodox Muslim would say, well, no, this is not a real, a real non-idolatrous faith, because they have these gurus, they worship the gurus. Why are they images? Because a strict Muslim will not tolerate any image at all. You cannot show the Prophet, for example, as I've mentioned many times before among the Sunnis, right? So nonetheless, there are no idols and deities in the ordinary sense. Okay. And the faith is predicated on the idea of what you might call a pure monotheism. Right. So, in many ways, Sikhism is now, in a way, appearing as something of a competition to Islam. A minor competition at this point. Why minor? For one thing, their numbers are small. The major point here is the empire is run by Muslims. So ordinary Muslims have the security of having a Muslim presiding over their destiny. In other words, the Muslims have patronage. That's how they're thinking. All right. This other faiths might be endangered, but if you're Muslim, you don't feel that you're endangered, not at a time when the rulers are Muslims. For Sikhs, this is a problem because the Muslims are viewing them as pretenders. That is, that they're saying the Sikhs claim to be monotheistic like us. They don't believe in idols. They don't believe in deities in the way in which the Hindus do and all of that. But at the same time, they are not sufficiently Muslim. At the same time, these people also, because they are somewhat monotheistic, in some ways, they pose a bit of a competition to Islam. Right? So because after all, where are the Sikhs getting their converts from? They're getting them from lower caste Hindus. It's not Muslims who are converting. Right? So they pose a political threat. They pose a political threat. They also pose a political threat because the idea is going to be, and this is going to become much greater during the time of Gobind Singh, is that the Sikhs are going to start to become militant to defend their faith. But this is jumping ahead of the story because we're trying to understand what is the thinking going on in Gobind Singh's mind. He's become the guru. Now, as he grows slightly older, he starts to mature. He has to take charge of the faith. His concern, on the one hand, is my fellow Sikhs are being endangered by the Mughal emperor, by the Muslim rulers. His other concern is that one way in which the Sikh can save himself is he relapses back into the Hindu faith. That is, he goes back to being a Hindu. You might say, how does that save him? Because the Hindu had the safety of numbers. Yes, the Muslims are ruling, but the Hindus are in a massive majority in the country. But that is not the only reason why they're going back to being a Hindu. They're going back into being Hindus because the question fundamentally that Gobind Singh has to say is, well, what actually makes us very distinct? For example, the Guru Granth Saheb has hymns from Hindu saints. It has hymns from him, Kabir. Kabir was neither a Hindu nor a Muslim. Right? The problem here is, if the Gurus say, we believe, for example, if the Sikhs say, we don't believe in a personal God, well, we know that one form of bhakti is nirgun bhakti. That is where God is formless. God is completely formless. So the Hindus might say, well, hey, we have that too. We have that idea too. Right? So just give you an illustration. The constant problem here is, what does a Sikh do to distinguish himself? Now, Gobind Singh, therefore, has these two major concerns. The third concern that comes out of a combination of these two is he sees fear coming into the community. The Sikhs are becoming, in his view, a decrepit people. That is, that they're becoming weak. They're not able to say What is it that makes them Sikhs? What is so distinctive about their faith? Recognize the greatness of their faith, do something to defend it. They're not doing any of that. So what he's going to seek to do is he's going to transform the faith radically. This is one reason why here in this print, think about it, why the print would do this. Why is it that Gobind Singh here, right, is given pride of place along with Nanak? And notice, by the way, that you look at the postures of Nanak and you look at the postures of, okay, you see there's a difference. There's a difference. And the difference has to do precisely with this fact that Nanak is in a kind of almost like a meditative pose. He's sitting the way in which very often a person sits in India when you squat on the ground, when you do yoga, for example. Gobind Singh is in profile shot, hands across his chest, exuding a certain kind of masculinity, certain kind of vigor, right? It's important why the representation is in this particular way. Now, the crucial thing here is this: what Gobind Singh will seek to do is he will seek to initiate what you might call the brotherhood of the faithful. That is, he's going to say, I really want to create a militant cadre, okay, of those who are going to be the defenders of the faith. And here's a story that I tell often. And someone might say, a Sikh scholar might come along and say, we don't really have any evidence for this. I don't care whether we have evidence for it or not. It is widely circulated, and it may or may not be apocryphal, but it tells you very well exactly what was happening at that time. So Gobind Singh is concerned for reasons I've described. What does he do? He calls a meeting of the Sikhs at some place. And he says, look, this is the issue, what I've described to you. Some of us are running away from the faith. We are turning back into Hindus. Some of us are being killed by the Muslims. We have fear in ourselves. We need to act like men. We need to defend the faith. We have to understand how our faith is distinct. We need to show to the rest of the world it is a distinct faith. Because, for example, someone might say, the fact that they were all wearing turbans. No, they were not necessarily wearing. This is after the fact. And by the way, Nanak almost certainly was wearing a turban, but if you've ever traveled in that part of the country, villagers almost all wear turbans. The way the Sikhs tie their turban is different. But a turban in itself says nothing. Okay, it's the kind of turban, the way you wear it, that makes the difference. But we'll get to that point of the story in just a few minutes. Because when Gobind Singh says we need to have the symbols that will distinguish us from everyone else, the turban is not among those symbols. Those symbols are called the 5 symbols of the faith, sometimes called the 5 Ks, because each of the word in Punjabi begins with the letter K. K. Okay? They're called the Panj Kakke. Panj is 5. So Punjab, Panj is 5, Ab is river, the land of 5 rivers, right? Just as when we speak about the Gangetic plains, we speak about the Yamuna, the Ganga Yamuna Tehzeeb, the great culture that developed along the Ganga and the Yamuna. Doab. Doab is 2 rivers, between the 2 rivers, between the Yamuna and the Ganga. So the Punjab is the land of the 5 rivers, 5. Panj Kakke is the 5 symbols of the faith. What are those 5 symbols? So one is Kesh, that the Sikh, and by the way, these rules really apply. You could say to all Sikhs, male and females, but as with almost every other religion, it is the males who are going to eventually become the markers of the faith, right? They are the ones by whom, that's why the turban, for example, Sikh women don't wear a turban, obviously, um, but Sikh men do. And I think that, and one reason for the turban coming in much later on was that I would argue a certain kind of way of making the males primarily responsible for the faith comes in a little bit later. When Gobind Singh talks about the five symbols, he's really talking about what Sikh men and women should do. Okay, one, kesh, that is, you don't cut your hair. And for the very orthodox Sikh, this also means you cannot groom your hair. Now, you might say that's a very minor point. It's not a minor point. I'll tell you why. I'll give you one illustration. So, if you've ever spent time in the Punjab and in cities like Delhi, especially outside the Punjab, and the proximity, obviously, in North India, where there are significant Sikh populations, uh, many Sikh men, particularly, let's say, from business families, even when they do not shave their beard, what they do is they manicure it. And you see this less often now, but you used to see it very, very frequently in the 70s, 80s. I remember it so vividly because the area I lived in, where I grew up in West Delhi, had a huge number of Sikhs actually. And they put a little net around it. Okay, little net around it. So they manicure their beard and they groom it. Uh, Now, kesh, that is hair, the idea was you don't cut, you don't groom at all. Then you have the kanga. Kanga is the comb. There's a fantastic article done by the great scholar Jeet Singh Oberoi where he talks about these five symbols and suggests how they actually work. Four of them work in pairs. Okay, pairs of two each. So you have the kesh, and then you have the kanga. You have the comb. And you say, well, what is the comb for? Okay, well, in a way, it's to keep. So you don't groom it, but you keep it in check. Okay, so grooming in the way in which I said, but you do comb it. So you can look at it metaphorically. It's wilderness and or or discipline and freedom. Okay, so the comb is like the discipline, the kesh is like the freedom, things allowing things to grow and then yet keeping some constraint on them, right? It's the whole dialectic of discipline and freedom. That's what he was trying to suggest. So you have the kesh and the kanga. Okay, and then you have the kada and the kirpan. The kada is the bangle, and then the kirpan is the little dagger, right? Little dagger. And here again, I'll tell you a story. Taking exactly the same object and the history of the Sikhs, bringing it to the United States. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is when I came here to California in 1993 to assume my position at UCLA, in those days, I was reading in the newspapers and the Los Angeles Times of a fascinating case, legal case that was coming up. And I decided to pursue it very seriously. Okay. And did exhaustive research and wrote a very lengthy article on it. What was this case about? So, in the Central Valley, about a few hours from um, LA, there is a place called Fresno, and there is a very large Sikh population there, very large. I'm talking about tens of thousands, right? Um, these are Sikhs whose forefathers had come 100 years ago, and they established themselves in some cases a little bit more than 100 in the farming community. Now, we need not go into their whole history. The important thing is this: in one family called the Chima family, they had two children. These two children, Sikh children, they were going to school and they were carrying on them a dagger. The dagger was sewn into their clothes. So let's say a girl is wearing a skirt, okay, and its dagger is sewn into the skirt, or a boy is wearing pants and a shirt, and it's sewn in there. so sewn into the shirt, let's say. Well, anyhow, they were playing sports, and a couple of the other children saw this object while they were playing, and it looked like a knife to them. So some of the kids went into the principal's office and complained that there were children who were carrying weapons. Now, there is a state law and there is a school code which says you cannot carry weapons to school for good reason, obviously. So the principal summoned the children to his office and said, I've been told by some of the other kids that you're carrying weapons. May I please ask you to display these weapons? And they said, we're not carrying any weapons. And he said, well, I've been told that you're carrying something that looks like a knife. And they said, yes, it's a kirpan. And the principal says, well, what the hell is a kirpan? And please take it out. And so he wants to see what it is. And the children say that, well, a kirpan is a sacred object. And the principal sees the object. He says that this looks like a knife to me. You're actually now in violation of the school code and the state law, and you need to bring your parents here. Otherwise, I'm going to have you expelled from school. So the next day, the parents are summoned. They come, and there's a consultation, and the principal says your children cannot come to school with these weapons. The parents say, hey, this is not a weapon. You're calling it a weapon, but it's not a weapon. It's a kirpan. And the principal says, I don't care what name you call it by, a weapon is a weapon. This looks like a knife to me, or a dagger, and it could hurt a child. And the parents say, yeah, but this is not intended to be used as a weapon at all, right? Long story short, they are going to be expelled. The parents hire ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, to defend them because they said their religious rights are being violated. All right. And the ACLU agrees to defend them on the grounds that, yes, their religious rights are being defended. The case goes to court. It's a fascinating case, really fascinating. The whole history is a very long history, but you understand what I mean. One of the intrinsically interesting and fascinating story of how one thinks about religious objects like this. Okay, so the ACLU lawyer says during the court hearing, and he's questioning the state prosecuting attorney, and saying that, look, you're saying it's a weapon, and the state says yes. State attorney says yes. It's, to my mind, this is a knife, and therefore the children are in violation of the state law. They cannot be allowed to bring this. So the ACLU lawyer says to the attorney, he says, tell me, in this school, is baseball played? And the person says yes. He says, what do they play baseball with? He says, well, it's played with a bat. So the ACLU attorney says, isn't it the case that if I took the bat and if I hit a child with the bat really firmly on the child's skull, might I not actually cause severe damage or even be able to kill the child? And the attorney says, I don't deny that fact, but a bat is a bat. Okay, and the ACLU attorney says, yes, and a kirpan is a kirpan. The ACLU attorney, the state says, yes, but it can be used as a knife. And the ACLU attorney says, yes, the bat can be used as a weapon. What if four boys are playing and one of them is losing really badly, and in a fit of anger snatches the bat and cracks the skull of another boy? Or what if a boy or a girl snatches a chain from a student's necklace where the cross is hanging? I snatch it and then I poke that chain into a student's eyes. Right? What makes an object an object? Is it simply the name, or does it have some intrinsic properties? And then how do we describe those properties? And are those properties transferable in a way, or are they not? Right? So this is, so by the way, just a little footnote here, but I wrote what became the lengthiest piece on this, which was widely circulated, and I defended the right of the Sikhs. And the Sikhs were so pleased that when I went to Delhi, they wanted to, a man called Mohinder Singh, who was running the Sikh Foundation, he sent me a message and said, I've read your piece. You're viewed by the community as a great defender of the faith, and we want to confer a saropa on you. A saropa is a ceremonial robe conferred on defenders of the faith who themselves very often are not from that faith. Okay, and we want to confer it at a ceremony at the Gurdwara. And I said, I humbly have to beg you not to involve me in any of this. I myself am actually not a religious person, right? I'm a non-believer, I told her. I said, I'm a non-believer, but I did what I think was the ethical thing to do because I have pursued this, and I think actually it is their right to bring the kirpan to school. And in fact, the ACLU attorneys argued very successfully that the kirpan has never been used in any school in California or in Canada, where there's a large Sikh population, as an offensive weapon, right? So anyhow, but I said, no, this is too great an honor for me. I'm just a small time scholar, nothing, no need to confer such a great distinction on me and all of that. It was actually quite humorous, the whole thing in many ways. But you see, the point here was that uh, there is a very long, interesting story. We could have done a whole lecture which would have brought in 50 different points of Indian history around the kirpan, because when the Sikh secessionist movement arose that I was mentioning in the 70s, one of their demands was, think of it, one of their demands was they should be allowed to carry their kirpan when they board a flight. Because the idea is that a kirpan is almost like part of your body. It's like another organ of your body. You carry it on your body all the time, all the time. And of course, the government of India said nothing doing. There's an international law of aviation. You cannot carry weapons, and this is going to be construed as a weapon. And we're not going to allow you to carry weapons in domestic flights. And the Sikh secessionists were adamant, no, you have to allow us to carry the kirpan. Okay, right? So there are so many ways in which one can, and there, by the way, I would not defend that right. Okay, there I would not defend that right, but that's a long story. Being able to take it on board an aircraft as opposed to a school, for example, right? So the critical thing here is why kirpan? Because and why the kada? Now let's understand this. Just like the comb contains the hair, so the kirpan is contained by the kada. It's almost like you put it, and in a way, symbolically, the kada is what envelopes it. Okay, it's what surrounds it, right? And then you have this idea, the fifth K. So you have the kesh, the kanga, the kada, the kirpan, and the kacha or kach, which is a cotton undergarment. A clean white undergarment, indicating a certain sense of hygiene, purity, all of that. He also stipulated, Guru Gobind Singh, that the Sikhs should abstain from alcohol and tobacco and from halal meat. Why? Because this was a way of distinguishing them from the Muslims, because Orthodox Muslim will only have meat if it's served halal. That is, it has to be cut. The animal has to be butchered in a certain way, and then a verse from the Quran has to be read while it's being butchered. Okay, and so for the Sikhs, it's the opposite. You don't have halal meat. This was a way to ensure that you're different. Of course, you also have to understand. Now, I have to go back to that great story, which I haven't told you yet, about what happened when he brought these Sikhs at this meeting. And as I told you, he said, look, this is what's happening to us. So what does Gobind Singh do? He says, I want at this meeting, at this very instance, 5 men to step forward who, as they step forward, are willing to give up their life for me instantly. And standing next to him is this guy who's carrying a huge kirpan, a sword. There's also another person further away, but this is just to symbolically convey that, look, you step forward, you say, I am willing to give up my life for you. Gobind Singh, you are the Guru, you are our Guru, I'm willing to give up my life for the faith. Now, who in his right mind, you say to yourself, would step forward knowing that, look, I'm stepping forward and my neck's going to get split, my head is going to be severed, right? So, of course, no one comes forward. And as no one comes forward, the Gobind Singh harangues the crowd, says, well, this is what I was saying. We're a weak people. We are not willing to give ourselves up for the faith. Consider that you are going to become the martyrs. Your names will be enshrined in memory forever among the Sikhs. Finally, one man steps forward. Gobind Singh tells the executioner, take him to this. There's a tent like 30 meters away. Take him there. The man takes him there. Okay? The executioner takes this man inside the tent. And for what reason? You don't want to have people seeing a man being butchered right in front of you, right? Let me finish the story and you're like, okay, what's the question?
So you said that he asks 5 people.
Yeah, to step forward.
To step forward, but why are they being butchered or executed?
No. He is saying, I want you to show that they're to me and to the whole community that you are willing to sacrifice yourself at the command of the Guru. I am the Guru. I'm telling you, because it's like stepping into battle. Very often, by the way, soldiers in most battles, particularly pre-modern times, when you were stepping into battle, it was with the recognition that you were not going to come out alive most of the time in the olden days. Right? I mean, World War I, World War II, how many soldiers died? Tens of millions. When you go into trench warfare, chances are you're not coming out. He's saying, look, we are a weak, cowardly people, unless you demonstrate otherwise to me now. I want you to surrender your life. 5 people do that, it will show. But we have to get to the end of the story. You'll see what I mean. Okay? He's saying, I want you to show that you're willing to sacrifice yourself. Just like a leader asks for people to do things. Right? So, and as I said, logically speaking, common sense, no one wants to do that because they know they're going to be killed. At least that's what they think. Finally, after haranguing them, saying, oh, you're like weak, you're effeminate, this, that, how are we going to protect ourselves if 5 of you cannot step forward and surrender your life? Because we have an enormous battle of wills coming up against the Mughal Empire. That's what he's saying. So finally, one man steps forward. The executioner takes him into this tent, which is 10, 20 meters away. And inside the tent, what happens? People hear a thud. They hear this, not the sound of this huge sword going through the air, as it were, until it strikes flesh. But when it strikes flesh, you hear a thud, and then you hear a sound of something, right? So they infer what? And then the executioner comes out and his sword is dripping with blood. So what would be the conclusion you would draw? It would be the conclusion that everyone in the crowd would have drawn. This man has now been executed. He has become the first man who has sacrificed himself in honor of the Guru. It's very hard to get the second man to do it once people see what's happened, but eventually it happens. The second, the third, the fourth, and then the 5th man goes into the tent. And then what happens? A moment later, the 5 men come out. None of them has been hurt. So how was the sword dripping with blood? Because inside there were 5 goats that had been gagged so that their voices couldn't be heard. And each time, one goat is killed. And when the goat's neck is, When the sword hits the neck, the head is severed, it falls on the ground. That's what they heard. They heard the thud, and they see the blood dripping from the sword. They don't know it's a goat's. But what's happened? 5 men, knowing that they had walked into the jaws of death, willingly, they walked there. Why? Because they were showing that they had the guts. They were going to become the great defenders of the faith. And they were going to put their life on the line for the Guru, for their great leader. Right? That's the story. So these become the 5 men, become known as the Panch Pyare, the 5 beloved of the faith. And this is where the idea of Shahidat again emerges. Martyrs. Now, they're not literally martyrs in this case because they won't kill. The Guru is not an inhumane man. He's not going to, just for the sake of protecting the faith, kill 5 innocent people. No religious leader of any merit would do that. But he has those 5 goats killed. Right? And the men come out intact. Because they had been willing to take this step, they become known as the 5 beloved. They become the examples of what it means to be a heroic people. And they become the founding members of what is called the Khalsa. So Khalsa is the brotherhood of the pure. Right? These are pure-minded people who have sacrificed themselves. And this is where the idea of Shahidat again comes in. Right? Martyrdom. Right? This is the beginnings of what you might call the militant aspect of the faith. Now, there are a great many other things happening, which we don't really have time to go into here. But when you for example, this guru, just as an illustration here, because I had shown you this, but we didn't go through all of it, right? Because we hadn't gone into all of their gurus. So I had mentioned Guru Gobind Singh over here, last of the 10 gurus, assumes a position at age of 10. So here you'll see what the Panch Pyare means, idea of the Khalsa, the Kesh, Kanga, all of these, right? And by the way, that, baptism, this is a word we should avoid using, but I'm using it simply for the sake of convenience, by which I mean that why should we avoid using it? Because it's Christian terminology, right? The idea of baptism. We don't really have anything called baptism in the Sanatan Dharam and Hinduism. But the idea was that those who join the Khalsa, they undertake a kind of baptism. So that if you notice that the Sikhs males are almost universally, with some exceptions, of course, they're called Singh. That's your last name. All right. If you encounter a Sikh, not all Singhs, by the way, are Sikhs, because some Singhs are Rajputs, but most Singhs are Sikhs, and the word means lion. So you take the mightiest, the king of the jungle, right? And the women take the name. Those who get initiated into the Khalsa, that is, these are the people who are saying that we are going to be the defenders of the faith. We're going to defend the faith to the last. The men who get initiated, that's the baptism, are then given a new name, and the women are called Kaur. Kaur is a surname they take, which means tigress, right? All right. But for example, among the things I didn't mention to you, in 1606, the son of Guru Arjan Dev gives shape to the idea of Mir and Pir. I just want to say one or two things about that, and that is going to effectively bring to an end our discussion of Sikhism up till this point in time, right? Mir and Pir. I should have had a slide to show you, but I will. You can see it up on Google. So when you look at photographs of the symbols, photographs, not the symbols like the Kesh and all of that, but you'll often see you'll see two swords. together, crossed into each other. Okay, um, the sword here being the kirpan, but so one it represents mir, the other represents pir, meaning what? The Sikhs do not distinguish between temporal power, that is power in the material world, and spiritual power. Okay, that is that they don't make a distinction between the political sphere in that sense and the religious sphere. That the two spheres really are complementary. They're complementary. All right. And so ideally, of course, a Sikh should be able to exercise both temporal power and spiritual power, which would, of course, be ideally in a Sikh kingdom. And this is one of the reasons, ideally, so such as the Sikh kingdom of Ranjit Singh, the last of the great Sikh rulers, who was defeated by the British finally in 1841. Um, and um, he presided over the Sikh kingdom for over 3 decades in the Punjab. But I think the idea of the Mir and Pir is something that, for example, forms part of the Sikh secessionist thinking too, because ideally a Sikh would like to live under the authority of Sikhs as well. So not just the spiritual authority, which he does right now. A Sikh is responsible only to his own community, as it were, takes his guidance and wisdom from the elders of the faith and from the Guru Granth Saheb. But if he's living under a secular state like India, then in that sense he's not exercising temporal power, right? So this idea of Mir and Pir became quite important too. Uh, and to go to your question of the turban, which I haven't forgotten, and I conclude with that. So the turban comes in much later. It comes in much later. It is what actually a scholar would call the invention of tradition, right? It seems like a very odd, almost contradictory phrase to people who are working with a conventional idea of common sense. Invention of tradition. Traditions are, from the point of view of many people, never invented. They've always been there. That's, of course, never the case. They're all invented. Uh, but the invention of tradition in this case means that if you talk to a Sikh today and you say, hey, what makes you different? What is it that is most distinctive about you? What makes you look different from everyone else? They'll say, oh, the turban. And how long has the turban been around? Oh, forever, since the time of Guru Nanak. Right? You see what's happening? They're saying, the early gurus all had the idea of the turban, and our turban is different. That's what, right? No, not at all. Absolutely not the case. Because, in fact, the turban became really important as a consequence of British policies in India after 1857-58, which I've spoken about, the Indian Rebellion. At that point, the British were really concerned that we need to change the composition of our army in India, because remember, the army in India was comprised largely of Indian soldiers. It was only the officers who were Britishers. And of course, the artillery was always with the hands of the officers, the English officers, because artillery was very dangerous. If you have Indians who take charge of the artillery, you turn it around and you fire cannon into British troops. You're firing on your own troops if you're an Indian working for the East India Company. So they didn't want that to happen. So artillery was never given over to the Indians, but the foot soldiers, the infantrymen, were all Indians, right? So when the rebellion was crushed, the British said, "Hey, we were betrayed by our by the Indians. We need to make sure that we secure our army so that we never have this problem of a rebellion within a mutiny within the army." And this is when they decided that they were going to create a distinction between martial races and non-martial races, and there were going to be a disproportionate number of martial races who were going to be put into the army. The idea was that these are people who are born warriors. Warriors have qualities of discipline, pride, loyalty, all of that. Okay. And the Sikhs, of course, had, as I said, in the 1857-58 rebellion, not supported the rebellion by and large. So, what is going to happen is that, as a way of distinguishing the Sikhs from all the others and giving them a kind of a spirit of their own, the British instituted the turban. That is how the turban came and became a part of Sikh identity. Right? That's the short form of the story. It
So the
really
British,
goes back to the 19th century, mid 19th century.
British instituted the turban.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Okay. That is the end of that. Do you have any questions? I mean, I tried to make everything very, very clear to you, and I think I've given you actually a, fairly complex history of about 150 years of the history of the Sikhs and the foundations of the faith, uh, the place of Amritsar, the Guru Granth Saheb, the problems in the study of Sikhism, the problems with the colonial sources, and the most important issue, which, when we come to a lecture on contemporary India and look at the Sikh secessionist movement, we can bring that up again there. But the whole question, which is a question that has bedeviled, as it were, okay, the whole bedeviled the Sikhs who want to really say that, well, we are completely different from the Hindus, we have a completely distinct identity, all of that. The very difficult question, as I pointed out, of just who is a Sikh, what makes a Sikh actually different from a Hindu, what are the grounds that are common to both, right? And of course, in the 19th century, which we haven't discussed here, this question is going to take many forms. The British are going to intervene in many ways in trying to actually create a separate Sikh identity. The Khalsa movement is very often, that is a movement, the Sikh secessionist movement of the 1980s is very often studied uh, um, incorrectly, without reference to what the colonial state had done to try to create this kind of identity.
Hmm.